am not sorry for something I didn't do, and I am not sorry for the things I did do.
Mr. Oneal, listen, stop, listen to me. You're not going to raise your voice again.
I'm not going to raise.
There are moments in a courtroom when the case itself becomes difficult to believe. Not because the evidence is complicated, not because the law is unclear, but the decisions made inside that courtroom create questions that stay with people long after the verdict. In June 2021, a Florida courtroom witnessed an unusual murder trial. The defendant was not only facing accusations involving the deaths of 2 family members, he also made a decision that would completely change the direction of the proceedings. He chose to represent himself. A father accused of killing his former partner and young daughter stood before a jury and became his own attorney. He
It's all said and done.
challenged evidence.
You will see.
During the trial, he personally questioned
Who
the
is
surviving
the
child
mass
who
murderer?
testified against him. The case had already begun with a family tragedy, but inside the courtroom,
In Tampa
the
Bay.
story was unfolding. A battle over evidence, a battle over credibility, and a battle over what really happened inside a Riverview, Florida home on one night in March 2018. This is the case of Ronnie Oneal III. Before the courtroom cameras focused on Ronnie Oneal III, this was a family story, a relationship, a home, and a series of events that would eventually lead investigators to one of the most closely watched criminal trials in Florida. Ronnie Oneal III lived in Riverview, Florida, a community located in Hillsborough County. He had a relationship with Kenyatta Barron, and together they had children.
That child suffered. And she already had a life where she was born with challenges regarding her physical and her mental disability.
On March 18, 2018, law enforcement received emergency calls from the Riverview residents. Deputies arrived and discovered a scene that would begin a major criminal investigation. The investigation would focus on what happened inside the home, the evidence collected afterward, and the testimony of the surviving child. When investigators arrive at a serious crime scene, their first responsibility is reconstruction. They must determine what happened, when did it happen, who was present, what evidence supports each conclusion. In the Riverview investigation, detectives collected evidence, interviewed witnesses, and documented information that would later become central to the trial. One of the most important pieces of information came from Ronnie Oneal IV, who survived the incident and later provided testimony during the trial. The investigation eventually led prosecutors to charge Ronnie Oneal III, but the case would not be decided immediately. It would take more than 3 years before it reached trial. Before the trial began, Ronnie Oneal III's defense strategy became a major focus. His attorneys previously raised arguments related to self-defense, including a request under Florida's Stand Your Ground law. The judge rejected that request, finding he could not use that defense. But perhaps the most unusual decision came when Oneal chose to participate directly in his own defense.
I will say, I'm sorry for your loss.
Representing yourself in a criminal trial is extremely uncommon. It requires understanding legal procedures, questioning witnesses, presenting arguments, and following courtroom rules. The decision immediately changed the nature of the trial, because the defendant was no longer only sitting at the defense table. He was now directly involved in questioning the evidence against him. When the trial began in June 2021, prosecutors presented their case to the jury. They argued that the evidence connected Ronnie Oneal III to the deaths of Kenyatta Barron and Ronnie Oneal, as well as the attack involving his son. The defense presented a different interpretation of events, but the moment that received widespread attention came when Oneal questioned his surviving son during testimony. The courtroom faced a rare situation, a father personally questioning his child during his own murder trial. This became one of the defining moments of the case, not only because of the testimony itself, but because of the emotional and legal complexity surrounding the courtroom decision. After hearing the evidence, the jury reached a decision. On June 21, 2021, Ronnie Oneal III was found guilty on multiple charges, including 2 counts of first-degree murder, attempted first-degree murder, aggravated child abuse, arson, and resisting law enforcement. The verdict brought the criminal trial to an end, but questions surrounding the case continued. In July 2021, Ronnie Oneal III was sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 90 years. The court's decision represented the final stage of the criminal process. But for those who followed the case, one aspect remained especially memorable. The unusual courtroom strategy placed the defendant directly at the center of his own defense. The Ronnie Oneal case was not only a story about a criminal investigation, it was also a story about evidence, courtroom strategy, and the decisions people make when facing the justice system. A trial is designed to answer one question: what does the evidence prove? Investigators collect the facts. Lawyers challenge those facts. A jury evaluates the evidence, and a verdict is reached. The Riverview case remains one of the most discussed Florida trials of recent years because it combined a family tragedy with an extraordinary courtroom battle. But perhaps the question that continues to draw attention is not only what happened that night. It is, how did the evidence, the testimony, and the courtroom decisions lead to the final verdict? The Ronnie Oneal trial showed how a courtroom can become the final battleground between evidence and explanation. But some investigations begin long before a courtroom is ever opened. In our next episode, we follow another case where a family, a community, and investigators were left searching for answers after a story that appeared ordinary began to unravel. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you do not miss the next investigation.